Good morning, everybody. Let's start with prayer. Dear God, thank you for this beautiful Sabbath day. Thank you for us all coming together to praise your name. Thank you for all that you do. We love you so much. Amen. Confucius said, "To be wronged is nothing unless you continue to remember it." Two traveling monks reached a town where there was a beautiful young woman waiting to step out of her sedan chair. The rains had made very deep puddles, and she couldn't step across without messing up her beautiful silky robes. She stood there, looking very angry and impatient. She was being horribly mean to her attendants, yelling at them, demanding they carry her across. But they had nowhere to place the many packages they were holding for her, so they couldn't help her across the big puddles. The younger monk noticed the woman, noticed her bad attitude, said nothing, and walked on by. The older monk quickly picked her up, put her on his back, carried her across the water, and put her down on the other side, onto dry land. She didn't thank the older monk. She just shoved him out of the way and left, continuing her angry journey. As the two monks continued on to their own journey, the younger monk was brooding and preoccupied. After several hours, unable to hold his silence a second longer, he spoke out. "That woman back there was very selfish and rude, but you picked her up and carried her anyway. She didn't even say thank you." The older monk softly replied, "I set the woman down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" Today, I want to talk about holding on to grudges. I want to talk about forgiveness and whether or not you can have true forgiveness in your heart if you're holding on to anger and resentment, if you're holding on to grudges. Let's begin. John 14:15 says, "Do not let evil defeat you. Defeat evil by doing good." Our story today is found in the book of Genesis, chapter 37. Joseph was a strapping young man at just 17 years old. He was one of many children of Jacob, and they lived in the land of Canaan. He had 11 brothers. Joseph was born when his father was very old. He and his little brother Ben were the only sons from Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. So Joseph had that going for him. He would also give his dad bad reports about his brothers, which kind of feels like tattling, but Jacob liked this about him. So he had a very special place in his heart for this young son of his. Verse 3 actually says that Jacob loved him more than his other sons. That had to be super hard for his siblings. Most parents try to be pretty equal with their love and attention. I always joke that I'm the favorite over my sister. I even program my mom's phone to say favorite kid when I call. But deep down, I know that my mom would never actually have a favorite. But Jacob did, and he showed it. So here's Joseph, clearly favored by their dad. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, one day his dad gifts him with this beautiful special robe with long sleeves. In my mind, it's one of the most beautiful coats ever in all the land of Canaan. All the bold, vivacious colors, reds, blues, yellows, maybe some green, like wearing a rainbow. And it probably felt just as amazing when he put it on. I imagine it felt as good as it looked, like rolling around on a silky cloud. In my imagination, it's one incredible robe. His brothers saw that he was more loved by their father than they were. And now he gets this amazing robe. No one else got a present that day. Just Joseph. Wasn't his birthday, just a regular day. So they started to hate him. They wouldn't talk to him in a kind way. I'm sure that every time they saw him, anger would just come bubbling up. And in verse 5, we see that Joseph started having dreams. Not just any dreams, special dreams. After he had the first dream, he went to his brothers early in the morning, the dream still fresh in his mind. "Hey guys, so I just had this crazy dream. I gotta tell you all about it. We were in the field together. My bundle stood up, and all your bundles of wheat gathered around mine. Your bundles bowed down to mine. Crazy, right?" Okay, so the situation is already pretty bad. He's already favored by their dad. He's already getting fabulous gifts, and now this dream? Just imagine how they took that. His brother said, do you seriously think you'll be king over us? Do you truly think you will rule over us? As imagined, his brothers didn't take to this dream very well. They hated him even more now, if that was possible. They hated him because of his dreams and what he said. So Joseph sees this happening, feels all this hatred, and stops sharing so much, right? Actually, he has another dream. In this dream, he saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowing down to him. Okay, you can't help what you dream, but he doesn't tell his brothers, right? Actually, he told his brothers about the second dream as well. He also told his dad about it. Hey, Dad, you wouldn't believe this dream I had. But his dad actually scolded him. What kind of dream is this? Do you really believe that your mom, brothers, and I will bow down to you? But deep down, his dad did wonder what the dream meant. The obvious favoritism, the amazing robe, and now these dreams. Even in his dreams, Joseph is more important than they are. They were getting so crazy jealous. They were definitely holding a grudge against their little brother. And the grudge was getting bigger day by day. His brothers would herd sheep for their dad. One day, his dad wanted Joseph to go to the town where they were herding and see if his siblings were doing okay, and to check on the sheep as well. He was then to come back and tell him how everything was going. Joseph agreed to do this. Of course, he'll do anything for his beloved dad. So off on this journey he went. He finally found them in the city of Dothan. So he began to walk over to where they were. He was still pretty far away when his brothers caught sight of him. They started talking to each other, plotting. Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw his body into one of the wells. We can tell our dad that a wild animal killed him. Then we will see what will become of those dreams of his. They hated him so much, held such a grudge against him, that they would rather see him dead than continuing to live with him. His big brother Reuben heard their plan and was disturbed by it. He might be angry at his little bro, but he didn't want him dead. So he convinced them not to kill him. Let's not kill him. Don't spill any blood. Throw him into this well here in the desert, but don't hurt him. Reuben planned to save Joseph later. Sorry. By this time, Joseph had finally reached his brothers and was standing before them. They pounced, ripping off his fabulous robe, and threw him into the empty well. The Bible doesn't say gently placed or slowly lowered. The Bible says threw, which probably didn't feel too good. I imagine he gets a little beat up and bloody. All this physical activity made his brothers hungry, so they sat down to eat. Well, all of them except for Reuben. The Bible says he was not with his brothers at this time. He might have been dealing with some of the sheep. As the rest of them were eating their lunch, they happened to look up and see a group of Ishmaelites traveling to Egypt. They had camels carrying spices, balm, and myrrh. One of the brothers, Judah, noticed them and started conspiring with his other brothers. What will we gain if we kill him and hide his death? You know what we could do? We could sell him to that group over there. Then we won't actually be guilty of killing our own brother. I mean, after all, he is our own flesh and blood. So they decided that killing Joseph was just too mean. Because, he was their flesh and blood. But selling him to a group of strangers, completely okay. So they all agreed to this new plan. When the traders came by, the brothers took poor, bruised-up Joseph out of the well, ignoring his cries for mercy. They sold him to the Ishmaelites for 8 ounces of silver. And off Joseph went with this group of strangers off to the land of Egypt. Remember, Reuben was not with the other brothers when all this was going down. When he came back and heard what they had done, he was so upset. Verse 29 says he actually tore his clothes to show he was sad. I could just imagine his anguish. He might not have liked Joseph very much, but he didn't want this. He walked back to his brothers distraught. The boy is not there. What will I do? In the end, they formed a plan. They decided to kill a goat and dip the special robe in the blood. Then they went back to their father, handing him the robe. Check this out, Dad. We found this lying on the ground. Is this your son's robe? Jacob looked it over and immediately felt a dread wash over him. It was the once beautiful robe he had given his favorite son, Joseph. And now here it was, tore up and covered in blood. He thought that a savage animal had eaten him, tearing poor Joseph to pieces. So Jacob tore his clothes and put on rough cloth to show his sadness. He continued to be sad about losing his son for a very long time. He lost his beloved boy. Imagine the sorrow of losing a child. All of Jacob's children tried to comfort him, but to no avail. He just could not be comforted. Jacob announced, "I will be sad about my son until the day I die." Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Ishmaelites had reached their destination with their purchased servant in tow. When they got to town, they sold him to Potiphar, who was an officer to the king of Egypt. So here is Joseph, in a land he does not know, bloody and stripped of his robe, missing his beloved father, deeply betrayed by his brothers, and now being sold yet again. Imagine his stress, his anguish, his fear. And me personally, I would be hating my brothers right now, just feeling such deep betrayal by them. But interestingly enough, the Bible does not mention any hatred for his brothers. A lot of stuff goes down in Egypt. Joseph is super liked and respected at Potiphar's house. Then some stuff happens with his master's wife, and he gets thrown into prison for something he didn't do. While in prison, he meets a couple guys who had some dreams. Sounds kind of familiar, right? Remember the dreams Joseph had, the very ones that pushed his brothers over the edge? Well, these two guys were upset because they didn't know the meanings of their dreams. Through God, Joseph was able to tell them the meaning. One of the men promised Joseph he wouldn't forget his kindness and would help him get out. But when the man was freed, lo and behold, he carried on his way and did indeed forget about poor Joseph. This kid just can't seem to catch a break. 2 years later, though, something amazing happens. The king of Egypt has a dream. 2 dreams, actually. And no one can seem to explain to him what these dreams mean. Finally, Joseph's one-time prison pal remembers him and how he had helped him. So the man went and told the king about Joseph. And once again, through God, Joseph was able to explain his dreams to him. He was so knowledgeable, so wise about the dreams. He didn't just explain the dreams to him. He came up with ways to be prepared with what the dreams meant. He came up with solutions to the problems the dreams predicted. The king was so impressed. He decided that Joseph should be in charge of his palace, that all the people in the land of Egypt would obey his orders, and that only the king himself would be greater than Joseph. He took a ring off his finger with the royal seal on it and put it on Joseph's finger. He gave him fine linen clothes to wear, and he put a gold chain around his neck. The king had Joseph ride in the second royal chariot. Men walked ahead of the chariot calling out, "Bow down to Joseph!" By doing all these things, the king put Joseph in charge of all of Egypt. And on top of that, he even gave him a wife. Joseph went from being a servant in a foreign land to being the second in command. Verse 46 says that Joseph was 30 years old when he began serving the king of Egypt. 30 years old, meaning it had been over 13 years since his brothers had sold him. 13 years that he had been robbed of his freedom. 13 years that his dad had thought he was dead. Well, 7 more years passes, with the crops being very good in the land that Joseph now has control over. Just like in the dreams he had explained, now all the land would have 7 bad years of crop and famine. But due to Joseph's serious planning, Egypt was okay. They were better than okay. They were prepared and ready for this. Unfortunately, the surrounding lands were not prepared, and they suffered. Hunger was all around. People came from all over to go to the king of Egypt and complain, saying they were so hungry. And could they get some of his plentiful stock of food? And the king would always send them to Joseph. They had to rely on Joseph for any food they desired. It was all up to him, all that power. One of the many lands affected was the land of Canaan, Joseph's hometown, where his dad and 11 brothers still resided. They also had no food. So the dad told them to go to Egypt and buy grain for them to eat, so that they would not die. 10 of his brothers made their way to the great land of plentiful food. Jacob kept Joseph's little brother Ben at home with him, afraid something terrible would happen to him, like it did to Joseph. So off the 10 brothers went, along with many other people from Canaan, off on a journey for food. Now remember, Joseph is in charge of the food of Egypt. He's kind of a big deal in this country, and he never forgot what his brothers looked like or what they had done to him. So imagine how he felt when he saw his very own brothers, the ones who sold him, there in Egypt, bowing down before him. He knew them, but they did not recognize him. They simply bowed before him and hoped for the best. Joseph acted like he didn't know who they were. Verse 7 in chapter 42 says, he spoke to them unkindly. Where do you come from? They answered, we come from the land of Canaan to buy food, sir. Joseph remembered his dreams he had about them bowing down to him. And now his dreams were coming to life. You are spies! You just came here to see how the nation is weak. His brothers insisted that they were just his servants, here to buy food, saying that they were all brothers, that they were honest men, not spies. Kind of ironic, right? Honest. After lying to their dad for over 20 years. His brother said, we are 10 of 12 sons from the same dad. We come from the land of Canaan. Our little brother stayed home with our dad, and our other brother is gone. Not once during this conversation did they realize that they were actually talking to that brother right now, that this is Joseph standing before them. Joseph used an interpreter when speaking to them, so they wouldn't know he understood their language. He decided to test them. He put them in jail for a few days. He insisted they bring back the little brother left behind in Canaan, that they could take some food back home, but someone had to stay here in prison until they came back. And that if they brought back Ben, he would know they were honest. He wanted to see if they were changed men. He wanted to see if they were good men, so he performed a few tests to gauge their reaction. As one brother stayed in prison, the others went back with food, got home, and found their food money in every sack. They got so scared. They said, what has God done to us? They might have wondered if they were going to be accused of stealing the food. Well, they ended up staying in Canaan for a while because Jacob didn't want to send away his youngest son. He was too scared of losing him. As expected, though, they ran out of food again. So the brothers went back to Egypt, this time with Ben by their side. Their dad reluctantly gave in. He had to before they all starved to death. They again went before that powerful man and begged for food. They brought gifts, twice as much money before, plus the money that was in their food sacks. They bowed down again before Joseph. Imagine how he feels. He is seeing his little brother for the first time in over 20 years. He gets emotional. He again tested them. He had their bags filled with as much grain as they could carry. He again had their food money slip back into the bags. And this time, he had his expensive silver cup placed into Ben's bag. He had a plan. He sent his servant after them after they began their journey. Their servant accused them of stealing his master's cup after he had been so good to them. The brothers were shocked. They defended themselves, saying they were so honest they even brought back the money they found. That if the servant found the cup in one of their bags, let him die, and they would all be slaves. They weren't scared because they knew they hadn't taken any cups in the palace. Imagine their shock when it was found in Ben's bag. They were horrified. They tore their clothes to show their sadness. They could not go back home without their little brother. Not again. It would destroy their poor dad. So they went back to Joseph to fight for Ben's freedom. They vowed they would all be slaves. Just let Ben go. They went back and forth, arguing with Joseph, pleading for Ben's life. They told him their dad had already lost one son and was still scarred by it. How Ben was the most important thing in their dad's life. How if their dad saw that he didn't come home with the others, their dad would die, and it would be their fault. They cried and begged over and over, begging to take young Ben's place. Joseph couldn't take it any longer. He had everyone else leave the room. Only his brothers remained. He began to cry. He cried so loud that everyone heard it. He cried out, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers fell silent. They were so afraid. They did not know what to say. They were shocked. How could this be? This powerful man before them who had their future in his hands was the brother they sold off? Joseph told them to come closer. I could just imagine what his brothers were thinking. Like, he's going to hurt or kill us. But instead, Joseph started speaking to them kindly. "It's me, guys, Joseph. You sold me as a slave, but don't be worried now. Don't be mad at yourselves. God sent me here to save lives. There will still be 5 more years of no food growing. But God sent me here so that I could keep you guys alive in an amazing way. So it wasn't you who sent me here. I'm in charge of the palace. I am master of all the land of Egypt. So go back home. Tell our dad that I'm alive, and I want you all near me. I will take care of you guys for the next 5 years of drought. You will not starve. Now hurry and bring back my dad." When he finished speaking, he was in tears, happy tears. Now remember, all the stuff his brothers had done to him. And here Joseph was in a place of power. He could have only taken care of Ben and Jacob, punishing the others. He could have made sure they paid for all the bad stuff in the past. He could have mocked them, tortured them, starved them. He could have made them suffer like he suffered. He did none of that. He forgave them. He held no grudges against them. They had done things that were beyond wrong. They had stolen years away from him. Years he could have spent at home with his dad. Sure, his life seemed good now, and he had all this power. But remember, it was quite a painful struggle to get there. But Joseph forgave what almost seems like the unforgivable. The brothers came back with Jacob, and just imagine the reunion between father and son. After over 20 years, I could just imagine the happy tears and big bear hugs that were going on. And so Joseph's whole family moved to Egypt, were given jobs and homes, and survived the next 5 years of drought. Ephesians 4:31-32. Do not be bitter or angry or mad. Never shout angrily or say things to hurt others. Never do anything evil. Be kind and loving to each other. Forgive each other just as God forgave you in Christ. Joseph was not bitter or angry. He was hurt, but he didn't hold it against them. He acted kind and loving. Most importantly, he forgave. And the ending to the story is quite beautiful. I've said before that I preach about whatever is bothering me or moves me. I had a completely different sermon in mind, but I kept feeling led to this one. And that made me really examine myself. You know, on the surface, I feel like I'm a pretty forgiving person. I feel like I let things go pretty easily. I move on. But when I looked into all my layers, when I searched deep inside, I realized I'm not as evolved and forgiving as I like to think. It's kind of crazy because I seem to get over the big life-changing things. I let that stuff go. It seems like it's the smaller, more petty things that I just can't get over. It appears like I forgive people, but mentally, I'm writing all that stuff down on my brain pad. Like, oh, really? Did you just act like that? You just call me that name? Did you just treat me like that? Put it in my grudge bank so I can revisit it later. And I don't just revisit it, I thrive on it. I will think about that situation over and over. And my body tenses, my blood boils, my body temperature rises. I want them to always know that they did me wrong. I don't know if I'm alone here. I don't know if any of you get like this, but it can get ugly. Do you think this is hurting the people I'm angry with? No. You know who this is actually hurting? This girl. I'm hurting myself by acting like this, by not moving on, by not forgiving. I'm also hurting God. I'm showing God I don't trust him enough to take care of my problems. It comes between us. While I was studying for this message, a thought came to me that really disturbed me. What if God treated me like I treat others? What if God held grudges against me? What if whenever I tried to go to him, he brought up all the stuff I did against him? I hear what you're saying, Crissy, but I just can't get over what happened last month. You know, when you called me out of my name? Or back in November when you yelled at me and blamed me for all your troubles? Or back in 2012 when you questioned my existence? I'm sorry, I just don't think you're sorry enough. I don't feel like I'm ready to get over it. So I'm just going to go ahead and hang on to this. Wish you the best, though. What if God acted like that? What if God just couldn't let go of our mistakes? Where would we be then? God wants us to let go for several reasons, but the biggest one is it hurts us. He makes us promise after promise in the Bible that he will take care of it. We just pray about it, give it to God, and move on. Truly move on. I'm not saying forget, because that's not always possible or plausible. I'm saying let go. God is like our superhero without the cape. He protects us. He will fight all the bad guys for us so we don't have to. But in order for that to happen, we have to let him. Several Bible verses back this up. Proverbs 20:22. Don't say, I'll pay you back for the evil you did. Wait for the Lord. He will make things right. Philippians 4:3. I can do all things through Christ because he gives me strength. Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you are tired and have heavy loads. I will give you rest. God knows that it is tiring, carrying the burden when you just can't seem to forgive. Over and over, he reminds us that we don't have to. He will carry it for us. Letting go doesn't make you weak. It sets you free. Mahatma Gandhi said, the weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute for the strong. So when you feel yourself holding on to anger, when you feel yourself holding on to a grudge, when you find that you just can't let go, mosey on over to the book of Luke, chapter 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. These are some of Jesus' last words, hanging from a cross, dying at the hands of those who hated him, who feared him. After being betrayed by his friend, after being denied 3 times by another friend, after being falsely accused and imprisoned, after being beaten and tortured while hanging from a cross, nearing death, he uttered those words. His thoughts were not how to get them back. His thoughts were not on how he would never forget this. His thoughts were not on making them pay. He did not hold a grudge against any of them. In his last moments, as horrible and painful as they were, some of his last thoughts were on the forgiveness of those who hated and tortured him. Father, forgive them. That is true forgiveness. That is letting go. That is giving it to God. We need to ask ourselves this. As Christians, are we being Christ-like? Are we forgiving others as God forgives us? Will we continue to hold on to grudges? Or can we be more like Jesus, praying for those who hurt us, even in our worst moments? Don't be like the young monk, holding on to something that had happened hours before. Don't be like me, keeping mental notes on all those who've done me wrong just so I can revisit them in the future. Be like Joseph, who forgave his brothers for doing the unimaginable. Be like Jesus, who is forgiving even in his final, darkest hours. Be as forgiving to others as God is to us. Luke 6:27-28, I say to you who are listening to me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Ask God to bless those who say bad things to you. Pray for those who are cruel to you. Franny the Frog was the best chef in the whole entire swamp. And all the frogs and toads of the region loved coming to her restaurant. Her flies and spicy bug sauce and her caramelized dragonfly wings were quite popular dishes. Franny was one proud frog chef. One day, Toby came to her restaurant with a huge appetite. Toby was a great big toad and a rather picky eater. When Franny's exquisite creations were brought before him, he complained, saying it wasn't really good, and what he actually wanted was a simple botfly burger. Franny came out of the kitchen to see what the problem was. Toby told her her food wasn't good enough for him, and certainly not enough to fill up a big old toad as himself. He said she was the worst frog chef he had ever met. This made Franny so furious that she went into the kitchen, came back with a frying pan, and whacked Toby right on the forehead. As you can imagine, this quite angered the huge toad. Franny quickly realized she was in the wrong and should have controlled her temper. She asked Toby to please forgive her. But Toby was so angry, he wanted revenge. He said the only way he could forgive her was if she handed him the frying pan so he could hit her back. All the other customers tried to calm Toby down, knowing full well he could easily crack little Franny's head open with that frying pan. He was one strong toad. But Toby wouldn't accept her apology. Franny felt awful for having bashed him, so she tried everything. She gave him a special cream for his bruise. She made him a very special swamp water shake. She even cooked him that beautiful botfly burger he so wanted. But Toby the toad insisted he would not be satisfied until he got to return the blow Franny had given him. The situation was starting to get a bit out of control. At that moment, a very old toad entered the restaurant, shuffling along with the help of two crutches. He was missing a leg. He heard the story of Franny in the frying pan and how Toby just would not forgive her. "Toby," said the old toad as he shuffled closer, "do you remember me?" Toby took a minute and then recognized the old toad. It was Mr. Reddit, his old teacher. When Toby was younger, he had started a fight with a bunch of other naughty toads. The fight got so ugly that Mr. Reddit stepped in to try and help the ungrateful Toby and lost his leg in the process. Toby never even gave it a second thought, certainly never asked for his teacher's forgiveness, even though he was the one responsible for his destroyed leg. Suddenly, it hit him. He now realized he was being unfair to Franny. Everyone, including himself, makes mistakes. People, and frogs and toads, mess up. And if we are to return blow for blow, wound for wound, hurt for hurt, all we are doing is prolonging the damage and preventing the healing. So even though his head still hurt, even though Franny was in the wrong, Toby decided to forgive her. He accepted her apology, and they spent the rest of the evening laughing and enjoying delicious botfly burgers. He decided it was better to forgive her and move on than hold on to his anger and get even. Toby, like us, had a choice. He can continue his mission to try and get even with Franny. He can continue to hold a grudge against her. Or he could forgive her. He could let it go and move on. He finally realized how he himself had been forgiven, how Mr. Reddit wasn't holding a grudge against him, even though he had caused him to lose his leg. So Toby the toad forgave. The very wise Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Forgiveness is an act of love, one of the greatest acts of love. And true forgiveness means letting go. Letting go of the hurt, the anger, the desire for getting even. Remember, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Let us hold on to that instead of holding on to grudges. I'm going to close today with a quote by Alexander Pope. "To err is human, to forgive, divine." I wish you all a happy and beautiful Sabbath day. Thank you.